In 1998, 6-year-old Charlotte Brown vanished during a family trip to Walt Disney World in Orlando. For over a decade, her family searched for answers while the case grew cold. Then, 12 years later, a homeowner digging in her garden unearthed a faded pair of Mickey Mouse ears, embroidered with Charlotte's name. The Florida sun pressed down on Margaret Lewis's backyard in Kissimmee as she knelt in the soil of her flower garden. At 58, she had spent 3 years transforming the once neglected yard of her modest ranch-style home into a personal sanctuary. Where others saw problems, she had seen potential. She worked her spade into the earth near the back fence, planting a row of impatiens. The soil felt oddly loose, as though it had been disturbed. Assuming it was Florida's sandy ground, she kept digging. 6 inches down, her spade hit fabric. Clearing dirt with her gloves, she unearthed a child's headband, black with 2 round ears. Mickey Mouse ears. The fabric was faded, the shape unmistakable. Margaret stared at it in her palm, unsettled. Neighbors had told her the last tenant was a single man with no family. The placement felt deliberate, not discarded. Along the band's edge, faint embroidery showed letters too worn to read. Her hands trembled as she carried it inside. On the counter under the cool air, the ears seemed to weigh more than cloth and wire, burdened by something unspoken. She reached for the phone and called the Kissimmee Police Department. Officers arrived within an hour, their faces grim as they examined the small, buried accessory. Margaret's garden had just unearthed the first clue in one of Central Florida's most haunting cold cases. The Brown family's dream vacation to Walt Disney World in March 1998 had started like thousands of others. Jim and Denise Brown had saved for 2 years to bring their 3 children to the Magic Kingdom, with 6-year-old Charlotte bouncing with excitement from the moment they entered the park gates. Charlotte was the middle child, sandwiched between 8-year-old Michael and 4-year-old Sarah. She had insisted on wearing her new white sundress with tiny pink flowers, paired with clear jelly sandals that sparkled in the Florida sunshine. Most importantly, she wore the custom Mickey ears her grandmother had ordered specially for the trip, embroidered with Charlotte in elegant purple thread. The family had spent the morning riding attractions and taking photos with Disney characters. Charlotte's favorite was meeting Cinderella, and she had clutched her autograph book tightly as they made their way toward the castle for the afternoon parade. The March crowds were manageable, but the area around Cinderella Castle was packed with families claiming prime viewing spots. Jim lifted Charlotte onto his shoulders as the parade began, her delighted squeals mixing with the music and cheers around them. Denise snapped photos while keeping Sarah close. The parade featured elaborate floats, costumed characters, and performers dancing through the streets. The family was completely absorbed in the magical atmosphere, surrounded by hundreds of other enchanted visitors. When the parade ended, Jim lowered Charlotte from his shoulders. The crowd began dispersing, families flowing in different directions toward attractions and restaurants. In the chaos of movement, Denise turned to gather their belongings from the stroller. She called over her shoulder, telling Charlotte to stay close. But when she looked back, her daughter was gone. The initial moments felt like typical vacation confusion. Jim checked behind nearby families while Denise scanned the dispersing crowd. Charlotte was small but distinctive in her white dress and Mickey ears. She had to be nearby, probably distracted by a character or attraction. But minutes stretched into panic. Disney security was alerted immediately, and within 20 minutes, the entire park was on high alert. Cast members positioned themselves at every exit, while hundreds of guests joined the search. Charlotte's description was broadcast throughout the property. The Browns spent the next 18 hours in a nightmare of police interviews, search coordination, and desperate hope. Charlotte had simply vanished into the crowd, leaving no trace except the memories of a perfect morning that had turned into every parent's worst fear. Detective Maria Santos of the Orlando Police Department received the call from Kissimmee on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. The Mickey ears discovered in Margaret Lewis's backyard had been photographed and cataloged, but Santos initially shared her colleagues' skepticism. Disney merchandise was everywhere in Central Florida, discarded and forgotten in countless yards and dumpsters. However, when Santos examined the evidence more closely, details emerged that couldn't be ignored. The embroidery along the headband's edge, though faded, was clearly custom work. Under magnification, the letters CHAR were still visible in purple thread. This wasn't mass-produced merchandise from a gift shop. Santos pulled the Charlotte Brown case file from the Cold Case Archives, a thick folder that had gathered dust for over a decade. The original investigation had been thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Charlotte had vanished without witnesses, security footage, or physical evidence. The case had consumed resources for months before gradually fading from active investigation. The detective spread crime scene photos across her desk, studying images of the Brown family from that March day in 1998. There was Charlotte, beaming at the camera in her white sundress, the distinctive Mickey ears clearly visible on her head. The embroidery pattern matched perfectly with the evidence from Margaret's garden. Santos called Denise Brown in Ohio, a conversation that would reopen wounds that had never fully healed. Denise's voice cracked when she heard about the discovery, 12 years of suppressed hope suddenly flooding back. She confirmed every detail about the custom ears, ordered from a specialty shop in Cleveland specifically for Charlotte's Disney trip. During their second phone conversation, Denise told Santos there was something else she needed to share. She explained that she had been thinking constantly about that day since the detective called. Near the castle, she remembered seeing a man with a camera, someone who was not an official Disney photographer. He carried a regular camera instead of the professional equipment used by park staff. Santos leaned forward, pen poised over her notepad. This detail had not appeared in any of the original witness statements. Denise went on to describe how the man had focused on Charlotte specifically, not the whole family. She recalled finding it odd at the time, but the crowd and confusion of the parade made it easy to dismiss. The man appeared middle-aged, perhaps in his 40s, and wore a Disney polo shirt that made him look like an employee. The detective felt the familiar tingle of a case gaining momentum. Unofficial photographers were prohibited inside Disney World, and anyone impersonating staff would have been removed by security. The description suggested that this man had deliberately disguised himself to blend in with legitimate workers. Santos began cross-referencing Disney employee records from 1998, narrowing her search to male workers between the ages of 35 and 50 who had access to company uniforms. The list was extensive, but it was a starting point that had not existed 12 years earlier. Detective Santos drove to the Kissimmee subdivision where Margaret Lewis had made her disturbing discovery. The neighborhood was typical of Central Florida developments built in the 1990s, with modest ranch homes on quarter-acre lots lined with palm trees and carefully maintained lawns. Margaret introduced Santos to her next-door neighbor, Evelyn Brooks, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who had lived in the same house for 25 years. Evelyn had the kind of memory that police investigators valued, detailed and precise about the comings and goings in her quiet neighborhood. She explained that she remembered the former tenant clearly. His name was Thomas Greeley, and he had rented Margaret's house from 1997 until sometime in 1999. Evelyn recalled that he mostly kept to himself, but certain things about him had struck her as odd. Santos took careful notes as Evelyn described the man. Greeley had been in his early 40s, of average height, with thinning brown hair. He drove a white van without any company markings, which he always parked in the driveway rather than inside the garage. Though the garage door was usually kept closed, Evelyn had occasionally caught glimpses of what was stored inside. She remembered that Greeley worked at Disney World, something she inferred from the uniform shirts he often wore at home. They appeared to be from the food service department. What troubled her, however, was the sight of children's items in the garage, costumes, toys, and what looked like camera equipment. At the time, she had assumed he might have children who visited, though she never actually saw any. He lived alone and rarely had visitors. One memory in particular had stayed with her. In the spring of 1998, likely April or May, she had seen him digging in the backyard late at night. She had been awake with insomnia, looking out her bedroom window, and spotted him with a flashlight and a shovel. It seemed unusual, she thought, for anyone to be gardening in the dark. Santos felt her pulse quicken. The timing aligned closely with Charlotte's disappearance in March 1998. If Greeley had been involved, he would have needed time to plan and carry out the burial. Evelyn also remembered that Greeley left the rental property abruptly in early 1999, abandoning his lease several months before it ended. The landlord had been frustrated by his sudden departure, noting that Greeley vanished without notice, left belongings behind, and owed 2 months' rent. The landlord eventually cleaned out the garage himself and threw away boxes of items, including children's toys. Evelyn remembered thinking at the time that it seemed wasteful. When Santos asked about Greeley's general behavior, Evelyn described him as polite but distant, the sort of neighbor who would wave if seen outside but never initiate conversation. He worked irregular hours, sometimes leaving very early in the morning or returning late at night. The detective thanked Evelyn for her recollections and returned to Margaret's backyard, studying the garden with new understanding. The soil disturbance that Margaret had noticed while planting was not the result of natural settling. It was the mark of deliberate excavation, carefully concealed but still detectable to someone who knew what to look for. Back at Orlando Police Headquarters, Detective Santos ran Thomas Greeley's name through every available database. The results painted a disturbing picture of a man who had deliberately stayed beneath the radar while harboring dangerous obsessions. Thomas Michael Greeley, born in 1956, had worked for Disney World's food service division from 1996 to early 1999. His employment record showed multiple disciplinary actions for inappropriate behavior, including complaints from supervisors about his excessive interest in photographing guests, particularly children. He had been written up twice for leaving his assigned work area to follow families through the park. The criminal background check revealed even more troubling information. In 1997, Greeley had been arrested for trespassing at a Kissimmee elementary school, claiming he was looking for his niece, though he had no family in Florida. The charges were dropped when he agreed to stay away from school property. 6 months later, he was cited for harassment after following a family from Disney World to their hotel parking lot. Santos contacted Disney's Human Resources Department, speaking with a supervisor who remembered Greeley's termination in February 1999. The final incident involved a guest complaint about an employee taking unauthorized photographs of their daughter near Cinderella Castle. When confronted, Greeley had become agitated and defensive, leading to his immediate dismissal. The timeline was becoming clearer. Greeley had been fired from Disney just 11 months after Charlotte's disappearance, and he had abandoned his Kissimmee rental shortly afterward. His departure from Florida appeared to be a hasty escape rather than a planned relocation. Santos returned to Margaret Lewis's property with a forensic team to examine the garden soil more thoroughly. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered what appeared to be multiple layers of disturbance in the earth. The soil showed evidence of being dug up and refilled at least twice, with the most recent disturbance occurring years before Margaret had purchased the home. Core samples revealed something even more significant. The soil composition changed dramatically at a depth of approximately 3 feet, indicating that foreign material had been introduced to the natural earth. Chemical analysis detected traces of lime, commonly used to accelerate decomposition and mask odors. The forensic team also found fragments of plastic sheeting buried at various depths, suggesting that items had been wrapped before burial. The plastic was consistent with heavy-duty construction material available at any hardware store, the kind someone might use to contain evidence. Detective Santos obtained a warrant to search Greeley's former employment records more thoroughly. Disney's security department provided surveillance footage from 1998, though most had been routinely destroyed after 7 years. However, they located several incident reports filed by guests who had complained about an unauthorized photographer near popular attractions. One report, filed just 2 weeks before Charlotte's disappearance, described a man matching Greeley's description who had been taking pictures of children without parental permission. The complaint had been investigated, but the man had disappeared into the crowd before security could locate him. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Greeley had the access, opportunity, and demonstrated pattern of inappropriate behavior toward children. His sudden departure from Florida immediately after losing his Disney job suggested consciousness of guilt. Santos began the process of tracking Greeley's movements after leaving Florida, a trail that would lead across multiple states and reveal a pattern of transient living that suggested a man running from his past. The second forensic excavation of Margaret Lewis's backyard began at dawn on a humid Thursday morning. Detective Santos had assembled a team of specialists, including forensic anthropologists, crime scene technicians, and cadaver dogs. The entire garden area was cordoned off with yellow tape, transforming the peaceful suburban yard into an active crime scene. Margaret watched from her kitchen window as the team methodically sectioned the garden into a grid pattern. Each square would be excavated carefully, with every layer of soil photographed and cataloged before removal. The process was painstakingly slow, designed to preserve any evidence that might have survived 12 years underground. The Brown family had driven down from Ohio overnight, unable to stay away despite Santos's gentle suggestion that they wait for results at home. Jim and Denise stood across the street with their now adult children Michael and Sarah, watching strangers dig for traces of their lost daughter. The weight of 12 years of uncertainty hung heavy in the Florida air. By mid-morning, the team had reached a depth of 2 feet in the section where Margaret had found the Mickey ears. The soil here was noticeably different, darker, and more compact than the surrounding earth. Forensic photographer Jennifer Walsh documented every inch as the excavation continued. At 11:47 a.m., technician Robert Chen called out from his assigned grid square. His brush had uncovered something small and pink, buried 18 inches down. As he carefully exposed the object, it became clear they had found a child's jelly sandal, the kind that had been popular in the late 1990s. Santos compared the sandal to photographs from Charlotte's case file. The size, style, and distinctive clear plastic with pink accents matched perfectly with what Charlotte had been wearing the day she disappeared. The sandal's mate was discovered 6 inches away, both shoes positioned as if they had been removed and placed deliberately rather than scattered randomly. The discovery energized the forensic team, confirming they were excavating the right location. As they continued digging deeper, the soil became increasingly disturbed, with clear evidence of multiple burial episodes. Fragments of plastic sheeting appeared at various depths, some containing traces of fabric that appeared to be from children's clothing. At 3 feet down, Chen's careful brushwork revealed the corner of what appeared to be a notebook or journal wrapped in deteriorated plastic. The water-stained pages were barely legible, but Santos could make out handwritten entries dated from 1998. The writing was erratic, switching between print and cursive, with several references to a princess and castle. One partially readable entry, dated April 15, 1998, contained the chilling phrase, "She wanted to go home, but the princess must stay in the castle forever." Another entry mentioned burying the crown and keeping the magic safe. The journal appeared to be Thomas Greeley's personal record of his crimes. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the excavation site, the forensic team made their most significant discovery. At a depth of 4 feet, in soil that had clearly been disturbed and refilled, they uncovered the first fragments of human remains. Small bones, consistent with those of a child, were carefully exposed and photographed in their original positions. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the forensic anthropologist, worked with painstaking precision to document each bone's location before removal. The remains were incomplete, but sufficient for identification purposes. Based on the size and development of the bones, they belonged to a child approximately 6 years old. Detective Santos stepped away from the excavation site to call the Brown family's liaison officer. After 12 years of wondering, hoping, and grieving, Charlotte's parents would finally have answers. The discovery would bring closure, but it would also confirm their worst fears about their daughter's fate. Detective Santos coordinated the immediate transport of evidence to the Orlando Police Department's crime laboratory, where forensic specialists worked through the night processing the remains and artifacts recovered from Margaret Lewis's backyard. The urgency was palpable. After 12 years, every hour mattered in building a case against Thomas Greeley. Dr. Patricia Hernandez supervised the careful cleaning and examination of the skeletal remains in the lab's sterile environment. The bones, though incomplete, told a tragic story. The child had been approximately 6 years old at the time of death, with bone development consistent with Charlotte Brown's age and physical description from 1998. Meanwhile, forensic technicians processed Greeley's water-damaged journal under controlled conditions. Using specialized lighting and chemical treatments, they were able to recover additional text from the deteriorated pages. The entries revealed a disturbed mind obsessed with Disney princesses and the fantasy of keeping a child safe in his own twisted version of a fairy tale. One entry, dated March 22, 1998, just 3 days after Charlotte's disappearance, read, "The princess cried for her family, but doesn't understand that I am her family now. The castle is her home. She must learn to be happy here." The handwriting became increasingly erratic in subsequent entries, suggesting Greeley's mental state had deteriorated rapidly. The most disturbing discovery came from DNA analysis rushed through the state laboratory. Preliminary results confirmed what everyone feared but needed to know with certainty. The remains belonged to Charlotte Brown. After 12 years of hope and uncertainty, her parents finally had definitive answers about their daughter's fate. Santos immediately contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to develop a profile for locating Greeley. The evidence suggested he was a highly organized offender who had planned Charlotte's abduction carefully, but his journal entries revealed increasing paranoia and instability following the crime. Federal databases showed Greeley had moved frequently since leaving Florida in 1999, working temporary jobs in Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. He had avoided steady employment or permanent addresses, living in motels, trailer parks, and rooming houses. This transient lifestyle suggested he was actively evading detection. The breakthrough came when FBI analysts cross-referenced Greeley's Social Security number with recent employment records. He had been working sporadically at a carnival company based in Birmingham, Alabama, helping set up rides and games at county fairs throughout the Southeast. The work was seasonal and paid in cash, perfect for someone trying to stay off the radar. Carnival records showed Greeley had been assigned to a crew working the Jefferson County Fair, which had ended just 2 weeks earlier. His last known address was a trailer park on the outskirts of Birmingham, where he rented a small mobile home month to month under his real name. Santos coordinated with Birmingham police and FBI agents to plan Greeley's arrest. The operation would need to be swift and coordinated. If Greeley learned about the investigation, his pattern of running suggested he would disappear again, potentially for years. As dawn broke over central Florida, Santos received confirmation that Charlotte's remains had been positively identified through dental records. The Browns would finally be able to lay their daughter to rest, but first they needed to ensure that Thomas Greeley would face justice for his crimes. The arrest warrant was signed by a federal judge at 6:30 a.m., charging Greeley with kidnapping and murder across state lines. Within hours, law enforcement teams would be surrounding his trailer in Alabama, ending his 12-year flight from justice. At 5:47 a.m. on a muggy Alabama morning, FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez positioned her team around the Shady Oaks Trailer Park on the outskirts of Birmingham. Thomas Greeley's mobile home sat at the end of a gravel road, isolated from the other residents by a cluster of overgrown pine trees that provided perfect cover for the approaching agents. The trailer was a faded blue single-wide from the 1980s, its aluminum siding dented and streaked with rust. A white van, different from the one Evelyn Brooks had once described, but consistent with Greeley's habit of using unmarked vehicles, was parked beside the steps. The license plate matched records from the Carnival Company where he had been working. Agent Martinez had coordinated closely with Detective Santos in Orlando, ensuring that Charlotte's case would remain the primary charge while federal authorities executed the arrest. The warrant authorized a search of Greeley's residence and vehicle, with specific instructions to collect any evidence linking him to other missing children cases. As dawn light filtered through the pine trees, surveillance confirmed Greeley was inside. A dim light glowed from the kitchen window, and shadows moved across the thin curtains. The element of surprise was essential. Given his history of flight, agents anticipated he would try to run if he detected their presence. At exactly 6 a.m., Martinez gave the signal. FBI agents advanced from three sides while Birmingham police secured the perimeter. The rest of the trailer park remained unaware of the federal operation unfolding in their quiet neighborhood. Martinez knocked firmly on the front door, weapon drawn but held low, announcing herself and her agency. The reaction inside was immediate. Furniture toppled, and hurried footsteps raced toward the back of the trailer. Two agents stationed at the rear saw Greeley burst through the door, wearing only pajama pants and clutching a small duffel bag. At 54, he was no match for the younger agents, who tackled him before he reached the tree line. The duffel contained cash, fake identification documents, and a bus ticket to Mexico scheduled for that very afternoon. Inside the trailer, agents uncovered a disturbing shrine to Greeley's obsessions. Photographs of children, many taken at Disney World and other theme parks across the Southeast, covered the walls. A filing cabinet stored detailed records of potential victims, names, ages, family details, and behavioral notes, compiled with meticulous precision. Most chilling of all was a collection of children's clothing and accessories, packed into plastic containers beneath the trailer's built-in seating. Among the items was a small white sundress patterned with pink flowers, identical to the one Charlotte Brown had been wearing when she vanished. DNA analysis would later confirm it belonged to her. On his computer, investigators found thousands of photographs taken at fairs, amusement parks, and family entertainment venues where Greeley had worked over the years. Each image reflected the same predatory method: surveillance of unsuspecting children cataloged with disturbing consistency. During his first interrogation at the Birmingham FBI field office, Greeley attempted denial, claiming no knowledge of Charlotte Brown or the evidence recovered in Kissimmee. But when agents confronted him with his own journal entries and the physical items from Margaret Lewis's backyard, his composure collapsed. He spoke in a low, detached tone about how Charlotte had been safe with him, describing her captivity as if it were an act of protection rather than a crime. He insisted he had given her everything a princess could want, exposing the depth of his delusion. The confession that followed provided long-awaited closure for the Brown family, while also exposing the scope of Greeley's crimes. After 12 years of running, hiding, and continuing to prey on children, his reign of terror had come to an end. The trial of Thomas Greeley began 18 months later in federal court in Orlando. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence linking him to the kidnapping and murder of Charlotte Brown, along with circumstantial connections to other missing children across the Southeast. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity, but journal entries and the organized nature of his crimes contradicted claims of mental illness. After less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges, including kidnapping resulting in death. During sentencing, Jim and Denise Brown addressed the court for the first time since their daughter's disappearance. They emphasized the years stolen from their family and their determination to preserve Charlotte's memory. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Greeley to life imprisonment without parole. Charlotte's funeral was held in Akron, Ohio, in a small private service attended by family and close friends. Her remains were interred in a cemetery overlooking a lake she had loved as a child. Denise placed the faded Mickey ears that had led to the case's breakthrough on the headstone. The case prompted policy changes at major theme parks, including stricter background checks for employees and expanded surveillance in vulnerable areas. On the 5th anniversary of Charlotte's funeral, the Brown family returned to her grave with flowers and new Mickey ears embroidered with "Forever Our Princess."